Good afternoon, everyone. The shortest day of the year, the solstice, marking the beginning of another year. Ancients were focused on the cycles going back hundreds of thousands of years. Adam's calendar to the left, South Africa. Stonehenge to the right. Most people would know Stonehenge, approximately 5,000 years old. But when I look at erosion like this on the megaliths, far older. More megaliths on the site that are showing erosion patterns that are well into the tens, if thousands of years. 1958 reconstruction, but look at the erosion on the top pillar there. And somehow all this magically goes into stone carvers. It gets hewed off a little bit. They even used reinforced concrete to give structural stability to some stones. How much weathering and erosion's on that? Because I believe, just like in Nias, what we're looking at here in Indonesia, these megaliths would have been planed flat before they were put into place, just like you see here. So what do you think the one on the right is? How much older than the one on the left? The erosion pattern's very different, but which one would be substituted for the public to see? Perhaps the stones have been reworked to make it look not as old as it was. It's being reconstructed twice in the last 100 years. With gold sitting near 7-year highs and talks of possible gold and silver increases over the next years. When we look across the news landscape, it's continuous trade wars, negative interest rates, Fed lowering rates, contracting manufacturer, pullbacks in consumer spending, and then talks of stock market plunges. Protect your wealth and invest in silver or gold. Patriot Gold Group. Open a no-fee-for-life physical silver or gold IRA before the dollar collapses. Patriot Gold Group is Consumer Affairs' top-rated gold IRA dealer. At Patriot, you work directly with an owner and avoid paying absurd broker fees. They'll explain to you what a physical silver or gold IRA is and the benefits of precious metal IRA investments. Working directly with every client to secure the most competitive pricing on gold and silver. Call today or request a free investment kit below. PatriotGoldGroup.com. The link's in the description box below. Glimpse here out of the UK. Sunrise, midday, sunset, shortest day of the year, November 21st. And if you're over the date line, it's November 22nd, marking the beginning of a new year. All cultures on the planet follow this because it's very integral to the planting and the harvesting seasons when winter's ending, when we're midway through the winter. A lot of things climatically so we can get our crops in the ground. All about the food, always has been. So if you're unfamiliar with a winter solstice, happened nearly at midnight, December 21st, which was 22nd in Asia. Shortest day of the year, Northern Hemisphere. Now the Southern Hemisphere is going into its longest day of the year. But there's always so many celebrations around these megalithic spots that have calendars from the Anasazi, and we see Adam's calendar here in South Africa, well over 10,000 years old, and also Stonehenge marking the exact solstice alignment. Why were the ancients so obsessed with correct alignments on the sun? I mean, that took a lot of work to put Stonehenge together. We don't even give people credit for barely scraping some stones together with sticks at that kind of age when these megaliths were put in place. But Adam's calendar, Michael Tellinger's work in South Africa, definitely needs to be examined further. I mean, they're talking sites like this going back pre-Younger Dryas into some cultures with vast knowledge, tens of not hundreds of thousands of years prior putting this together. You know, we're talking multiple glaciation cycles here. And the ancients went back millions of years trying to map these cycles out. They were so obsessed with it because just like we see this mini cycle, this grand solar minimum that's intensifying at the moment, going to disrupt our food production. Perhaps it's not a 400-year cycle. Perhaps it's a heavier, more powerful cycle. And we'll need to transit back in time here in the Holocene to find one of the matchups in the spots 4,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago. I personally don't think it's a 400-year cycle. I think it's a far heavier, more powerful cycle. Things are just happening faster than anticipated at the moment. So most of the news coverage was on Stonehenge. And I am going to come back to this photo because look how nicely all the stones look, all hewn, really smooth now. Excellent reconstruction on this. Now, Adam's calendar, though, doesn't get very much airtime. And you have to ask why. with the winter and the summer solstice precisely marked back at least 11,500 years BC, then add another couple thousand. We're looking at like 13,500 years ago. What were they marking? Because down in South Africa, we see hundreds of thousands of these possible electrical conduits of sorts. A lot of ancient legends about gold mining and different kind of societies, civilizations, 200,000 plus years ago, that was somehow destroyed, and what we are now is the remnants of what this was 2 ice ages ago. So Adam's Calendar, I highly encourage you to take a look at that. Michael Tellinger putting this together. And when you're looking off the cliff over here, that standing rock that you're seeing, it's a bird-shaped marker. Much like this is Stonehenge. If you're going to be looking to the solstice, this is the June 21st summer. It's going to come right over that rock right in the center. So it gets you a good indication of how precise this needs to be. You know, people have been going to Stonehenge for thousands of years. It's not a new place, but I like some of these older photos because when I started to work on this video, it was almost as if Stonehenge has been reconstructed to make it look less old than it actually is. A personal opinion, I want to present my evidence here. Now we're going to go back into the early 1900s. Now, if you're unaware, Stonehenge has been reconstructed twice. Now, the first reconstructions were to try to put up stones that had fallen over. And we would be talking from, say, 1911 to 1921, somewhere in that era. This is the era of the tomb raiders. So you really need to wonder what disappeared back then that will never be seen, that was dug up. And also the rocks, there's really a huge V formation in there. I just don't see anything like that in today's images. So obviously some things have been moved around. And apparently this is a glimpse post-production, late 1920s. And what I wanted to focus on was if you look almost in the center, you can see a stone right there that was tilted originally. During the reconstruction, they dug it up, they righted it. And again, when we take a look at some of the oldest photos that are available from Stonehenge, we see it again and again. And I thought, all right, let's match these up. Left is the initial trying of rebalancing some of these stones. The right is where it's at now. Look how far it was underground. How much of it was below ground. So tell me what the sink rate is for a monolith where all the others are pretty much in place. What happened to this one? Why did it sink so deeply in there? That in itself is pretty interesting of how deeply that was buried. And then, you know, come across some other images here during the reconstruction. And when you see these different types of cranes, this one's from the 1950s, from 1958. You can tell by the style of crane and also by the style of clothing that people are wearing. So, you know, just the uprighting again, new cement concrete to try to put foundations in on some of these things. And you notice the crane's a little bit different style here. But again, what they've done is they've taken off the capstones across the pillars. And then you look at that and you say, it looks kind of rounded. I don't know what's going on up there. But here's a close-up of it, at least in one that they removed. Notice the weathering on this. I mean, those of you who are out there that understand degradation of rock through wind or rain, I mean, this was perfect when it was put there. Anywhere from 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, according to the experts who told us how old this thing is. Now, what really is the water erosion dripping off this? Very similar to the Sphinx. You know, we're getting all these dates of water erosion. But then magically, look how clean it is when they put it back on top. Like, what happened there? You're telling me that fully eroded piece turned into this nice, clean, smooth out object again. And then when you look and you see stone carving tents in working facilities, and look how straight edge those things are now. Over on the left, they didn't even bother to reconstruct that one because it's so eroded. How old is that one? You see, some of the questions here need to be answered because the dates on what we're seeing that's standing versus the dates of things that have been covered, largely different. Was it a massive flood that did it, knocked over some, covered them with mud, and they're barely visible? Because when they turn some of these pillars to the sides, you can see the two notches there. Well, within the capstones themselves, there's also a counter notch that sits in there. They don't use any concrete, but look at the erosion on that as well. When they carved these, they were flat and those nodules were up so those pieces could sit together. Also, you have images just like this. You can actually see the flints of rock and the chips of rock all around where they're putting this here, chipping it away. I mean, they're not really changing it, but they are changing the facade. So if the facade changes, would it appear the age would change as well? Would it not? Because when I look here, I say, wow, that's pretty well put back together, but what's that one laying right there in the front? If it was part of the originals, how is it so eroded far above anything else that we see in that landscape? And then some of the black and whites coming out of the 1950s reconstruction here, buried. And when they uncovered it, look what we find. How eroded is this one? You know, this makes no sense. If this was a standing pillar and it fell over, how many tens of thousands of years of erosion is that on there? Because we do see the same thing, 1958 construction. They even pull it up and you can get a really close look at it. Something's far wrong with the history that we're given. And then, you know, other stones that are on the site here. All right, so these would have been hewed pretty either circular or square. They would have had some at least edges on it. It's one of the most sacred sites left on our planet. Are you telling me that they didn't put the time and effort in to like cut something at an angle so it fit better? And you're telling me this is only 4,000 years of erosion on this? I think the time dates are wrong on what we're seeing erosion-wise. Maybe it was two sites built on top of each other. Maybe some of the newer megalithic stones that we're seeing are actually two different ages of megaliths built on top of each other. That's the only possible explanation, because you can't have two stones with this much erosion sitting next to each other on the same site. Because I am very convinced that if they were going to build such a thing, they wouldn't have thrown up just a bunch of unworked rock and said, good enough. Because even here in Nias, this is in Indonesia, it's an island in Indo, and if you surf, you'll know where Nias is. 1915, but look how nicely they had already sculpted the rock to put those flat faces on it. And that's the first thing I thought of when I saw that Nias photo. I was thinking, all right, here we're in 1950s. We have a really nice flat face, and directly next to it, we have an incredibly eroded piece. Is that eroded one still there, or did it disappear and it was replaced with the hewn one? And also another thing that was pointed out when I was doing, and I started to go down this rabbit hole of, is this thing way older than we're told? Because another eroded megalith here from the bottom, they still wanted to keep it in place, so all they did was use reinforced concrete and filled in. So I'm asking myself, all right, that was a solid piece to begin with. But look at all the erosion hole marks there, and then how did the entire bottom erode out of that? So then I found a little bit closer in picture here. This is from the 1980s, but you could see how the color of the reinforced concrete had changed since the late 1950s into the early 1980s. But again, instead of discarding that, they repaired it and put it back in place. But where's the erosion on this? I mean, regular rainfall didn't do that to any of the other stones there, so why is this one so special? So we've already seen more than a handful that have extreme erosion on them. Because what we get here in some of these renditions is everything looks pretty square and linear, and the top capstones going around look pretty squared and linear. But what I just showed you in these previous photos, they could have started square and linear, but all these tens of thousands of years of erosion, at least on some of them, have turned them into fully eroded megalithic stones. Because maybe our timelines are far, 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 far older than they're telling us in what is traditional history from the experts. I mean, why would you lie about the age of our civilization unless we've gone back 30,000, 70,000, the last interglacial 108,000 years ago, and some of these were built back then. Thanks for watching. Hope you got something out of the video. And instead of giving money to the United Nations in a global carbon tax, I invite you to check out the Adapt 2030 December merch. It's not CO2, it's not you, it's the sun. Men and women's short and long sleeve tees and hoodies. Warning, this design may trigger Al Gore. The link's in the description box below, and it's another way to help support the Adapt 2030 channel.